Well, good morning, everyone. I have precisely the top of the hour. Welcome to day 2 of Private Lands Partners Day 2021. I apologize for it being virtual, but we did have a really great session yesterday. I hope you were able to join it live. If not, there will be a recording available after the meeting at some point, and we will make that widely and publicly available. I want to kick it over to, I'm Steve Jester, the Executive Director of Partnerscapes, and I want to kick it over to Jim Stone, our Chairman of Partnerscapes, to give a brief welcome before we get started. Jim?
Good morning, Steve. Thank you, and good morning to everybody from Montana. Welcome to the second day of Private Lands Partners Day. Again, echo Steve, sorry we aren't in person, but we had a wonderful day yesterday, and just again want to welcome you all and really thank our hosts in Oregon, Ron, Kaylee, Cindy, Steve, just a great job, the whole planning team. It makes it a little difficult to do this by a Zoom, but really appreciate those presentations from Montana, Nebraska, and Iowa yesterday, and we got a great lineup for today. Those of you that missed the little social yesterday, wish we could do one again tonight, but looks like we're out of schedule. But that was a fun to see a lot of friends and neighbors there on that last night. So again, welcome. Hope you all enjoy the day. Some really great lineups for our schedule. So enjoy the day and ask lots of questions. And again, thanks for signing on today. So back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Jim. And we're going to get started right away so we can try to stay on schedule. And first up, I would like to introduce the panel lead for the Ashland Forest Resiliency out of Oregon, Cali Davenport with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Cali, can you take it away?
Certainly. Thanks a lot, Steve. Good morning from Oregon, and it is bright and early here in Oregon. I wish you guys were all here today. This is where we were supposed to be, right here this week. But unfortunately, you'll have to just deal with me being in front of my background right now for the time being. But no matter what, we'll see you in 2024 out here right at this place. So there were lots of great presentations yesterday, and Shelley queued us up to talk about prescribed fire. So I'm going to take you out into the woods a little bit, and I'm going to take us off the prairie and put the hard hat on so we can get going here. My group from the Ashland Forest Resiliency Stewardship Project and Partnership is I'm about to introduce those folks. And with me today, again, I'm Cali Davenport with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the state coordinator of the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program here in Oregon. With me today, I have Bill Kuhn, Dr. Bill Kuhn, who's an ecologist with the Forest Service. Dr. Carrie Metlin, who is an ecologist with the Nature Conservancy. Chris Chambers, who is the Wildfire Division Chief with the City of Ashland's Fire and Rescue Department. Mr. Marco Bay, who is the Executive Director of Lomacotsi Restoration Project. And Pete Winnick, who is the District Conservationist for the NRCS down in Southern Oregon there. And last but certainly not least, we have a really great private landowner, Mr. Todd Hoffman. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Bill. Take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Cali, and good morning, everyone. So why are we interested in doing an all lands approach to forest restoration in Southwest Oregon and the Ashland Watershed? Well, the problems we're facing here are particularly acute. Problems we're facing are problems facing that people across the Western U.S. are facing. So we have, among other things, a rapidly changing climate in our part of the world. That means a drying and warming climate. And we also have an extended drought. Among other things, we have long history of intensive forest management, which has left our landscapes homogenized. We have a dominant forest type of young, dense forest with an altered species mix. That has really altered the wildfire risk to communities. And we've lost a lot of our old growth, that intensive harvest, old growth forest. which would have been habitat that would have supported important wildlife species such as the northern spotted owl and Pacific fisher. And because of this, we've jeopardized or diminished important ecosystem services that the forest can provide, such as biodiversity, carbon storage, clean air, water. And in the process of doing forest restoration, we can increase revenue and support jobs and local economies. All right, next. So what are our options? So given that situation in the altered landscapes, what can we do to change things and restore the landscapes? Well, we can use fire as a tool, and we do that. We use prescribed fire as a tool in appropriate locations, especially in the wildland urban interface around communities, to protect communities and allow for safe and effective wildfire response and suppression in the future when that happens. We can use mechanical thinning, bring out the chainsaws and mechanically thin to reduce the overly dense forests and try to accelerate the development of older forests that we've lost, and combine that thinning with prescribed fire. So again, preparing the landscape, once we do the mechanical thinning and prescribed fire, we can prepare the landscape to accept wildfire in the future should we choose to allow wildfire as for ecological benefit. And the idea is to restore kind of the historic mosaic of a mix of both old and young and open and closed and non-forest habitat types to support overall biodiversity. And in the process, we're creating revenue, we're supporting local economies. Next. So this slide shows some priority fire sheds. So fire sheds are similar to watersheds, but in this case, it's delivering fire to communities rather than delivering water to communities. So this slide shows not the only priority of fire sheds, but the highest priority fire sheds in the Western US, where fire has a large potential to be delivered to neighboring communities. So this just shows here, highlighted the Rogue Basin where we are in Southwest Oregon as a cluster of those high priority watersheds where we really have a chance to use those forest restoration options I just talked about to really mitigate the potential that wildfire is delivered to communities. All right, next. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So, and again, this is zooming now into the Pacific Northwest, that's Oregon and Washington. And what you're seeing are the results of it's a quantitative wildfire risk assessment that was done a few years ago that looks at the potential of wildfire to impact a series of highly valued resources and assets, such as timber, wildlife, infrastructure, water, et cetera. And this shows that Southwest Oregon, in particular, shows a lot of red, and the red indicates that there is a lot of potential negative impacts from wildfire to those highly valued resources and assets. So again, showing that the Rogue Basin highlighted there in the pink outline is really kind of a bullseye of where forest restoration and all lands forest restoration really needs to happen to mitigate the potential negative impacts of fire. And so I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Bill. So I'm here to sort of introduce you to our landscape a little bit. This is the 4.6 million acre Rogue Basin. And as Bill made clear, you know, there's a lot going on here. And when there's a lot of different objectives that you might actually need to achieve across the landscape, and when a landscape has as many different ownerships and those patterns of ownership are very closely intermixed, such as ours, it takes sort of a coordinated, cohesive approach. And so there were a bunch of partners that came together to think about what do we want to achieve on this landscape and how. And we actually ended up writing a cohesive forest restoration strategy that integrates across fire protection, wildlife conservation, restoring open landscapes, and accounts for economics and how we're going to get the work done. And it's really important because this is, as Bill said, a fire-prone landscape. And then, of course, relevant to the partnerscapes, this is a landscape where we really have to engage with private landowners. The Forest Service, for example, can't do this alone. And if you look at this ownership pattern, a third of it is actually private land. And then I want to highlight that, this approach that we're taking across this 4.6 million acres was really piloted in the Ashland Forest Resiliency project. And so here you can see this project area where we've been working for quite a few years on a number of these principles. For example, these projects are integrated by design. We actually come to the table thinking about community protection, habitat protection, the conservation and promotion of watershed values, and then restoring those open forests. And we move forward in a very transparent and open way. And that is using multi-party monitoring, which one of my roles has been to coordinate, where we look at an array of basically partner values. What do we really care about? And then sort of cobble together the coalition of scientists to say, how is this work that we're doing actually performing? So that allows us to have a lot more trust and open adaptive process moving forward. Now, zooming all the way in, here's that Ashland Forest Resiliency project. So the double black line is sort of our project area. We started on the federal lands here in green with initial infusions of cash. And then we were really excited to be able to grow. And so you can see the brown areas are where we've grown to private and municipal lands. So of this 42,000 acres of forest, we're aiming to treat about 13,000 acres or 25% of the landscape. And so now I'm really excited to be able to turn it over to my partner, Chris Chambers. But first, good thing there's an animation there. I want to highlight that when Todd Hoffman speaks at the end of our session, this is Todd Hoffman's property, this really strategic ridgeline where we're extremely excited to have gotten some prescribed burning going in a very critical ridgeline for this landscape. All right, Chris Chambers.
Thank you, Carrie. The city of Ashland has a vested interest in what goes on in our municipal watershed. Duh, right? This is the clean water that we're delivering to our citizens and potentially fire that gets delivered from this watershed into our city. So the city's got a long history with the Forest Service. We all the way back to 1929 with a cooperative agreement that was signed with the Secretary of Agriculture and the Mayor of Ashland. And then fast forwarding to recent history, the city engaged with the Forest Service using the Healthy Forest Restoration Act to address the fire risk and also to create a unique option where the community played a part in the federal NEPA process of environmental analysis and actually submitted an option to the Forest Service that was selected. So city community generated plan for managing our watershed. And by and large, that plan became the Ashland Forest Resiliency Stewardship Project. Some of the values that are at risk on our landscape, as in all landscapes, we have those values and we can enumerate them sometimes, which is really helpful in discussions. The water in the background you see are a reservoir and the dam that deliver water to the city. That water has an annual value of $8.5 million. It yields 900 million gallons a year. We have a very, very active trails association and a lot of trail users from mountain bikers to distance runners to hikers and birders and everything. At least 50,000 trail visits a year. I suspect that's gone up a lot during COVID. We have a ski area that sits at the top of our watershed with over 75,000 skier visits a year. And the private property value surrounding the watershed down into the city is at least $1.6 billion. So when we start talking about the costs of doing restoration work, I think we have to be sure to compare those costs to the resources that we are at risk and that we're trying to promote on the landscape. And indeed, we're not talking about this as if it hasn't happened yet. Yes, we have fire. The picture in the upper left there, the 1959 Watershed Fire, is actually the Hoffman property that you're going to hear about in a little bit. That property burned in that 59 Ashland Watershed Fire. That picture taken from downtown Ashland looking at the hillsides burning. Same thing happened on the opposite side of town in 2009 with the Siskiyou Fire. a 200-acre fire burned one home. Then we had the 2010 Oak Knoll fire that started right along the interstate and burned 11 homes as it started as a grass fire and jumped to a neighborhood. And then the bottom right, just last year, we had the devastating Alameda fire, which started in the lower section of Ashland, burned a couple Ashland homes, but went on to decimate the communities of Talent and Phoenix with over 2,600 structures burned. Unbelievable fire event. So we are in the midst of this right now. It is a very, very pressing issue for us, as I'm sure most everybody has seen on the news when you tune in during August and they're talking about the Western United States. Okay. So the basis for our project is this partnership created between the Forest Service, the city, the Nature Conservancy, and Lomacotsi Restoration Project. You can hear from representatives of all of those partners. We put together this project under a stewardship agreement, which is a really interesting mechanism where entities outside of the federal government can work in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service in this case. We all have our roles in this project, but we share those roles as well. So you can see a little bit of what each partner brings to the table. And certainly the sum of the parts is greater than the whole in this case, undoubtedly. And this project has been implemented now for going on 11 years. So this isn't just a concept, this is something that we've been doing. And as Carrie mentioned, that started on federal land and now has also encompassed over about 6,000 acres of non-federal land as well. A big part of that is getting the community on board. And I'm sure everybody has experienced this to a greater or lesser degree. You got to have public support for doing work, especially on public lands, especially something that's going to really have impacts to the public via noise, via smoke, closing trails and roads from time to time. We actually drove over 3,000 log trucks through narrow streets of downtown Ashland over a period of about 4 years. So all those things necessitate a lot of public engagement. So we've done many tours out on the ground. We have website, social media, do a lot of work with local media outlets. And then we have several stops out in the watershed where you can encounter interpretive signs and understand why active management is so important. Here's one example is a postcard that we sent out to all the citizens of Ashland and the adjacent community of Talent that were going to be impacted by burn smoke. Like burning is an interesting conservation practice, incredibly important in our dry forest landscapes, but also a conservation practice that can impact tens of thousands of people who aren't part of your project. So it's kind of unique. And we do spend a lot of time and effort reaching out. There's a whole suite of alerts for people to sign up for and ways for them to get information about why they see smoke in the hills and why we're using fire. And it's been a very successful effort. We have a standing email / text list of about 5,000 people that we send burn alerts to every time we have a burn day. Am I switching here to Pete, or am I still on this one?
This is you, Chris, and you're transitioning to landowner outreach.
Got it. Thank you. Sorry. Of the various funding sources we've had during the life of AFR, the Joint Chiefs Restoration Project was an important one. It brought us a significant amount of funding that came from both the USDA Forest Service and NRCS. And what that did was really kick off the private lands involvement in our project area. Having NRCS at the table, bringing money from the Farm Bill through EQIP was incredibly important in growing our federal footprint to include an all lands project. And we kind of renamed and rebranded the project at that point from Ashland Forest Resiliency to this Ashland Forest All Lands Restoration Project. And Pete will talk a little bit more about that. Landowner outreach was incredibly important. Again, not just informing the public about what we're doing, but convincing private landowners to get on board with us in this partnership and participate and let chip in to do work on their property. with significant contributions from NRCS and the partnership and the partners project from Fish and Wildlife Service to help us get out there, collect data, and get people enrolled in this program and get the work done on the ground.
Turn it over to Marco.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. So all the planning, all the preparations over many years, working with our agency partners and the community to get this project launched. The forest supervisor approached us, in 2010, and how are we going to scale up to actually get this work done on the ground? And just to give a little background, the community of Ashland is, during the era of the timber wars, there was a lot of polarization with working lands, with industry, with issues like the northern spotted owl, threatened endangered species. We're working in a late successional reserve in the watershed, which is managed for threatened endangered species like the northern spotted owl. How are we going to pull off a commercial thinning project, a commercial timber sale in an ecological way? Chris talked about the community engagement piece, but how are we going to mobilize? So stewardship agreements were a really good tool for that community, and it gives us the ability to incrementally build capacity over a long period of time. It's organized under a master stewardship agreement with supplemental project agreements under that to scale up the capacity needed, working with our timber operator community, service providers, and prescribed fire specialists. So Loma Katsi, we're tasked with one of the key delivery partners on the ground, mobilizing workforce and crews and offering contracts. Some of that's in-house, some of that's external. So we scaled up to that. We have 17 full-time equivalents have been employed through just this project, over 200 personnel employed, 15 contractors, lots of funds and dollars infused into the community. Next. So in addition to the workforce scaling, it's the training, an ecological approach to these treatments. This is not a kind of a cookie cutter, a silviculture prescription. There's a lot of diversity. We want to retain a lot of diversity of species, and we really want to protect the large old trees left in the watershed, which there's quite a few. So that's the architecture we really care about, especially for late successional habitat. So we're thinning around legacy trees. We're protecting those trees during prescribed burn operations. And we're really paying attention to our actions through commercial thinning around those trees as well. Next. And this integrated approach is not just the labor part of the implementation, it's mobilizing and building that capacity, that technical capacity, working with our neighboring tribal partners, working with our other service providers and internally and across the whole partnership, a different way of doing business. The partners are laying out the units, we're developing the prescriptions, the Forest Service is signing off on them. And on the private land side, we're working closely with NRCS. We're marketing, we're offering timber sale contracts, we're implementing the work, and then it's a feedback loop of monitoring our treatments through an adaptive management approach. And we're really looking at what we call these ecological anchors, these large trees, these significant parts of the landscape and on the ground that we care about. Next. So to date, we've treated 13,000 acres. 7,000 of those acres are on Forest Service within the municipal watershed. 6,000 of those acres are on private and municipal lands. Activities like density management, surface and ladder field treatments, prescribed understory burning. We've engaged over 108 landowners, threading together all these private properties in a contiguous effort to reduce fuels, restore forest resiliency, and if fire does come, as Dr. Bill Kuhn mentioned, we want to be able to manage those landscapes in those types of events. Next. So the commercial part of it, that photo on the right is really the one I wanted for folks to focus on. The first log truck coming through the community of Ashland. In the past, there was logs had not come out of that watershed in many, many, many years. These are the byproducts of ecological thinning. With a lot of that community outreach, instead of the one finger wave that would have been in that picture, there was the thumbs up and the 5-finger hello in support of this good work happening to protect the watershed. We implemented 2,300 acres of helicopter thinning. This is decomposed granitic soils. Anything above 20% slopes has to be aerial yarded. And then where the slopes were more gentle, we were able to do ground-based thinning and commercial utilization. We generated 14 million board feet out of the project. Next. And what Stewardship Authority allows us to do is take those logs, and the partnership markets those logs, we sell those logs, and the profits that are generated after we pay the operation get reinvested back into the project for more prescribed fire, for more maintenance, for more fuels reduction work. And the hands that touch the land, the people that do the work, our tribal partners, our Latino crew members, our Euro-American crew members, all together working for this landscape to get this work done. Often they're not appreciated and the song is not sung. And this is a nationally recognized model. You could see we have Undersecretary of Ag, the Chief of the Forest Service, leaders from the various agencies. These are our youth crews. We layer in a youth training and employment program, a workforce development initiative into the project as well. Next. So now we've scaled to the Rogue Forest partners. And if you have the time, I'd encourage you to check out the website. It's up on the screen. You can see the Ashland project on the southeast part of the map, and where Dr. Metlin's putting the cursor. And now we've scaled to across the Rogue Basin. We're building capacity. We're replicating this model, this all lands effort, and in key areas that need treatment. And Pete Winnick from NRCS just will talk about the West Bear All Lands project that is adjacent to AFR. That's our next project. Turn it over to you, Pete.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Marco. Yeah, NRCS about 15 years ago, we moved to what we call the strategic approach to conservation, which positioned us absolutely perfectly to enter into these landscape level treatments, partnership treatments. And, so far we have continued to use what was the original CCPI, RCPP, and with the Ashland Forest Resiliency was a joint chiefs. And as I mentioned, we were able to treat approximately 3,500 acres of the 6,000 private acres that were treated through that area. So we were absolutely excited to be able to be a part of that and do our part. As everybody's mentioned, these lands are interspersed between public and private lands. And you really can't get a landscape level treatment without getting on both lands. Anyway, we basically collaborative effort, partnerships working, which it was so successful that we were able to, as Marco said, move into our next landscape level project, which again, we use the Joint Chiefs for, we were able to that for Ashland Forest Resiliency project. But this next project is the West Bear RCPP, which was sponsored by Loma Katsi. And this area is the #1 priority for community protection across a 1 million acre planning area in the Rogue Basin Cohesive Wildfire Strategy. So we've been very excited. We've been very blessed to have amazing partners here. Again, as you've heard from all of our partners. And I think the strategic approach to conservation that NRCS in Oregon has used really has positioned us as good as we possibly could. I believe we have more RCPPs than any state in the country. And so we're really grateful for that. And with that, I think it's the participation of the private landowners that really help. They were just very eager. Again, we had great outreach with all of them and our partnerships. And so with that, I think it was, just again, very grateful to be able to be part of this partnership. That's just working great. And so landscape level treatments, I don't think you can beat that. So with that, I think I should probably turn it over to Todd Hoffman. I think we're getting a little bit late with time. He's again, private landowner in the Ashland Forest Watershed that wants to talk about a little bit of his experience and how it's gone. So maybe I'll turn it over to Todd now.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to present and discuss all the work that's been done. First, I want to acknowledge all of our partners. Couldn't have done all the work that we've done on our lands without a lot of dedication from all these individuals and their organizations and so on and so forth. I really want to speak to the fact that restoration is a long-term project. We first started working on our lands back in 2003, even before the AFR project started. And we always had the goal to bring the property to a point where we could introduce prescribed fire and bring our forests back to the way they should be, allowing for older growth stands to eventually develop again. Our property was heavily used as a resource, as a gold mine. It was logged and it was not in great shape from a forest standpoint or ecological standpoint. And when Chris Chambers from the city approached us back in 2003, like I said, I always wanted to see fire on the ground. And this past spring, as you can see by this map, we were finally able to get that fire after many, many years of mechanized thinning, piling, burning. We finally able to get the understory to a point where we could actually get fire on the ground. With this slide, we're actually seeing what the project area was this spring. We were able to burn 318 acres. We still have a few units to go, but it was really an impressive project. And our partners also Grayback Forestry, that were another contractor, just did a phenomenal job with Lomacazzi out there every day. I'm very engaged with the property, and I myself was out there every single day. And it was just exciting to see this finally happen. And again, couldn't have been done without all the partnerships. Okay, we can probably go to the next one here. So these are actually, this is showing, you can see the dates on the bottom. These are actually the progression over the course of most of the month of April. And again, you know, it's just a very tedious process, but watching these crews work and get fire on the ground was just absolutely amazing. And I also want to speak to the fact that, again, you know, this is a long-term project. We still have work to do for this particular underburn, but really it's about stewarding the land and being a member of the community. I live right next to our property, and I personally had friends, and my daughters even lost their apartment in the Alameda fire last year. So my home is in the wildland urban interface. So I'm very dedicated to protecting both our lands, but also our community as a whole. So it's been really wonderful to be part of this really unique and wonderful project. I think we have one more slide there. Again, this is just the progression of the burn. Not a whole lot more to say about this. Just again, almost 18 years of work to get to this point, and without the participation of all these individuals on this panel today, we would not be here. So again, I just really, as a landowner, partnerships are really superb, and look at all these wonderful people that brought us to where we are today. And with
Thank you, Todd.
my pleasure.
That was our quiet, that was our quiet outreach, or quiet
Yeah.
out.
I'm the
Giving you
soft-spoken one. So I want to leave
giving you
time for Q&A.
Round of applause, as best we can virtually. Kelly, we've got about 3 minutes left. Do you want to show one of those videos, or you want to take a question? Your choice.
If anybody's got some questions, feel free to give Cindy or put them in the Q&A box.
I think
I can queue up the video and see if we can get on here, Steve.
I'll get the question in. How many acres were in the West Bear and Ashland project area?
And anybody else can hop in and answer that.
I could jump in on the West Bear. So Ashland, we had, as Chris Chambers shared, there was a 52,000 acre footprint or project area, and we implemented 13,000 acres of that, 25% of the landscape. For West Bear, we've moved to the adjacent watershed, and we're looking at a 27,000 acre area, and we're currently funded to treat about 6,000 of those acres, and we're continuing to apply for resources to try to ameliorate the threat of fire and reduce fuels and restore forest health across that landscape.
All right, I'm ready to queue up the video.
All right.
It works here. Let's see. Yeah.
And if this works, this is me talking with my 9-year-old son and teaching him about restoration and the work we're doing on the land. So definitely about next generation.
Is it full screen? There, okay. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Running.
I think our streaming rate is a little low, so we might not be able to get the background narration of me talking to my son about introducing fire to the ground.
Yeah. And for those on the webinar, there's a link to this video provided in those program materials. So maybe we'll just get everybody to look at it offline. I sure miss hearing you and your son talking, Todd. But I don't think we're going to be able to get that across. We've got such
Tight schedule.
wide variety of bandwidths. Well, I'd like to thank the panel from Ashland Forest Resiliency. Great job, great story. There were several questions that folks had. The contact information, if you missed it on the slide for the presenters, is in your program material. And I'm sure these folks would be glad to visit with you offline or in the chat as we go forward. So thank you. Thanks all.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you.
A round of applause. All right. We're gonna move to a little bit south of Oregon now. We're going down to the Texas Prairie Wetland project on the coast of Texas, central coast of Texas. And leading that presentation will be Taylor Abshire with Ducks Unlimited. Taylor, you want to introduce your panel right quick before we get going with the video?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you all for having us. I am Taylor Abshire. I am a regional biologist with Ducks Unlimited. I am joined today with Chad Stinson, partners biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and one of our private landowners, Mr. Marion Woolley, who's been with the program for about 15 years and done several projects. So he'll be able to provide some pretty good insight on working with the program and some of the results that he's had for wintering waterfowl, as well as some of the management practices that he's done on the property. To start off, we do have about a 4-minute presentation or a video, if it'll play. We'll see.
I don't know, are we getting any audio at all, Taylor?
No, I don't think so. I was just about to type into the chat box that I was not getting any audio on my end. So I guess we'll skip the video. There is a link to the video. It's on YouTube. It's a really great introduction to the Texas Prairie Wetlands Project, the work that we do, and Mr. Woolley is included in that video as well. And so we did a hunt on his property, and he allowed us to have that video shot as part of the Conservation Wrangler recognition that we received back in 2019. Let me share my screen and we can go ahead and just jump into the presentation. I don't have a ton of slides, but that'll give us time for questions and all that good stuff towards the end. Again, my name's Taylor Abshire, and I run the Texas Prairie Wetlands Project along the Texas Gulf Coast. We cover 28 counties, stretching from Orange, which is the Louisiana border with Texas, all the way down to Cameron County, which is in the valley. And so we have a huge geography that we work in. And so for this couple of slides of presentation, I'm just going to go through the history of the program, why we have it, and the importance that it has had for not only waterfowl and shorebirds, but also for the people of the state as well. So the importance of this program was to provide critical staging and wintering habitat, because the Texas Gulf Coast winters about 90% of the waterfowl population and about 250,000 snow geese within the Central Flyway. This includes northern pintail, blue and green winged teal, gadwalls, shovelers, as well as redheads. And then these permanent and semi-permanent wetlands provide nesting and brood-rearing habitat for our resident mottle ducks, fulvous, and black-bellied whistling ducks along the Texas Gulf Coast. And so the question is, or has been, what is the need for a private lands program? And if you look at the history of the state of Texas and the habitat that was here 200 plus years ago, we have lost several million acres of wetland habitat, and that number is over 7 million acres now that have been lost in the last 200 years. And Texas is a heavily privately owned state, and so there's not about 95% of the landscape in the state is privately owned. The other 5% is owned by Fish and Wildlife, Parks and Wildlife, and several other nonprofits that are doing work across this landscape. But because this landscape is so heavily privately owned, working with these individuals is key to ensure this habitat remains on the landscape for years to come. So in 1991, the partnership began. It was created like none other. It was founded on two objectives: to deliver wetland habitat to meet waterfowl foraging objectives set by the Gulf Coast Joint Venture, and to provide critical staging and wintering habitat for waterfowl, as well as breeding habitat for local shorebirds and waterfowl that are here on the Texas Gulf Coast. And so when this partnership began, it started with state, federal, nonprofit, and private landowners. And that's including Ducks Unlimited, NRCS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and the Gulf Coast Joint Venture. And so this partnership has been going on for over 30 years for habitat delivery along this, in this geography. And it is one like no other, bringing together these different partners to work with private landowners on this landscape. And so for the sake of a project, we work with these private landowners by conducting a site visit and really evaluating what kind of habitat do they have, because working on this in this landscape and this geography, landowners have multiple land uses, whether it's oil and gas, ag production, hunting operations, and ranching is another operation that these guys, these landowners have on this landscape. And so really trying to see what their current land uses are and trying to see if a wetland project will come together on their property. And so we have a site visit with our biologists, and then we provide a survey and design to ensure that the wetland habitat that we work with these landowners to create is going to be beneficial and additive to the landscape. And then we go through an agreement process with these landowners that is for 10 years, as well as a reimbursement from the program that will provide up to $300 an acre for the enhancements, levee construction, water control structure installation, and ensuring that this habitat's going to be on the landscape for those waterfowl species. And then we work with those landowners to construct the project and various contractors along the Texas coast. And then we provide a final checkout and continue to work with these landowners into the future to make sure the projects are functioning and the enhancements are best suited for wintering waterfowl. So what is a wetland development agreement and a Texas Prairie Wetlands project? These are 10-year agreements where we're working with these landowners, providing a cost share of $300 an acre on the flooded habitats that are created. And we include management plans to include habitat manipulation, whether that's disking, roller chopping, herbicide treatments, as well as the flood timing and duration to best suit the waterfowl that are on this Gulf Coast. And so our annual delivery ranges from 15 to 30, our annual delivery is 15 to 30 agreements that we deliver, working with these various landowners, and about 3,000 acres of enhancements delivered every year. And so, like I said, this program has been around for 30 years, and we've delivered over 850 agreements working with private landowners. And down here in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see all of those yellow dots represent a project that was delivered. And that number now totals over 1,600 individual wetland units and right at 90,000 acres of habitat delivered between the Texas Chenier Plain and Texas Laguna Madre down along the lower Texas coast. The program and partners have provided $29.6 million towards these enhancement practices and construction projects, which is about $335 per acre. And the program itself has provided $15.5 million towards these enhancements. So building the levees and landowner reimbursements. But the biggest thing to really point out on this slide is that it's not just the partnership or the program that's providing these reimbursements to these landowners. The landowners have put in $14.1 million of their own cash into these enhancements on the landscape. So it's really about building these relationships with the landowners and helping them understand the importance of this wetland habitat within this geography. And once they see those benefits and kind of begin to understand the importance of the Gulf Coast to wintering waterfowl, they invest their own money into these conservation projects. And not only is it the captured cost of this 14 million on the construction side, but they also continue with those management practices and making sure these projects are flooded and functioning for these wintering waterfowl as well. So that's a continued cost that these landowners are participating in for 10, 15, 20 plus years down the road. And these landowners have definitely seen a benefit of having these projects on their property and working with the partnership to, one, continue ensuring that waterfowl have suitable habitat on this landscape. But it also provides opportunity for them to take their kids or grandkids or family members out and enjoy a hunt, or at least see the sunrise come up and kind of see the marsh come alive. It's a really unique opportunity to work with these folks and see how their reaction and interest in the program continues to grow. And so there are several benefits outside of just the waterfowl benefits that we've been talking about. And some of those go into the environmental benefits as well as the human benefit as well. And so when you're looking at some of the environmental benefits on this landscape, freshwater wetlands represent nearly half of the global freshwater. And so that kind of ties into some of the water storage that we have within these wetlands. And through this program and the 90,000 acres of habitat delivered, we have increased the landscape water storage by 40,000 acre feet of water. So that's water that we can capture on the landscape to prevent it from rushing downstream or into local communities where water would otherwise congregate. We can catch it on the landscape and slow it down from going into our other waterways. And after Hurricane Harvey, Houston was on the news about the extreme flooding as well as other coastal areas. And these wetlands were able to capture roughly 40,000 acre feet of water and prevent that from going into some of these urban areas that are downstream from the projects that we've delivered. So there is that environmental benefit there. And then some nutrient sequestration. Wetlands are have high nutrient processing rates, preventing those nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus entering downstream water bodies. And then 46, these are some pretty cool numbers here. So 46% of the acres that have been completed have been with rice producers. And so Texas historically has been one of the top rice producers in the country. And there have been some changes in some other geographies that picked up substantial rice acres, but of the rice that we have left in the state of Texas, this program has worked with and is delivering roughly 22% of the active farmed rice ground left in Texas. So I think there's about 200,000 acres of rice left in the state, and we've worked on roughly 50,000 acres of those rice acres on the landscape. The other thing is 54% of these acres are pedestrian emergent and moist soil wetlands. And this is working with various landowners on ranches, along creek beds, along coastal marsh, and within other floodplains within this region. And then the other thing is the people aspect. And we briefly talked about some of this flood protection on the previous slide, but 1 acre of wetland can store up to 3 acre-feet of water. And so based on the basin that these wetlands are in, we calculated it up at about an acre, 1.5 acre-feet per acre, just based on the geometry of some of these projects. But these projects also provide hunting opportunities. And in 2006, there were 121,000 waterfowl hunters in the state of Texas. And so working with these landowners, as well as other agencies and nonprofits, we're able to put this habitat on the landscape for years to come and for future generations, and hopefully continue to grow that number of outdoorsmen and women and folks who use the landscape for whether it's bird watching, hunting, and getting the full opportunity of being able to see a cinnamon teal along the Texas Gulf Coast, which isn't all that frequent around here. So it kind of is a site for some birders and things like that. You never know what you're going to see on some of these wetlands. And then hunting opportunities provide jobs, and hunting and fishing in the state of Texas supports almost 66,000 jobs. And it brings in an annual income of, I think it's $4.1 billion into the state economy for various hunting operations, and whether it's waterfowl or any other species. And so a lot of that money is going into these local economies, helping support mom and pop restaurants and hotels, and really sustaining some of these local economies and smaller communities. And again, that goes with the wetland creation. A lot of the contractors that we work with are mom and pop contractors. And so through this project, we're not only helping waterfowl and the landowner enhance their property, but we're also helping the communities that these folks live in and continue to kind of feed the economy in these local regions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Woolley. I have my contact information here, and if you want, you can go ahead and, or at any time, that QR code in the bottom left-hand corner is an active link, and you can use that to find more information on the program, as well as the video that we had a little bit of technical difficulties with. So you can scan that link, and there's some additional information there, and the video is fantastic. So if you get a chance to watch it, I would definitely say go for it. Mr. Woolley?
Yes, good morning, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here and kind of talk about the Prairie Wetlands project from a landowner standpoint. Real briefly, I bought my place in late 2001, and in 2002 I started working with the local DU office on waterfowl enhancement on my property, and in 2003 we completed one of many of the first projects. Basically, I have a ranch west of El Campo in Morton County. It's predominantly rice farming. As Taylor mentioned, rice farming in our area has been on a steady decline in acreage planted, especially from the peak. And a lot of the enhancements that I did actually helped the ranch survive and be able to maintain rice farming today. The project is a wonderful partnership for landowners in conjunction with the U.S. Fish and Game, the NRCS, DU, the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Not only do you receive financial support, which is very important for the project because these projects are usually very big and they're expensive, but you receive the technical support. And had I just embarked on going out and building a duck pond, so to speak, it probably would have worked, and it probably would have worked for a couple of years. And then I would have had all kinds of structure problems, levee problems, water drainage in the wrong place, a conglomerate of things by my lack of knowledge. And so when they came out, they surveyed the land, they surveyed the waterfall structures, went back, designed the program, designed the habitat, and we built it off of their recommendations and their specs. And it's been producing wetland habitat and waterfowl come every year, and it's just been a wonderful win-win for what DU is trying to accomplish and for the landowners. As Taylor mentioned, it's just not a project strictly geared towards waterfowl. I can't express the amount of wildlife that utilizes just one of my wetland habitat projects. That massive amounts of shorebirds and migratory birds that come along, the non-game species, and the local waterfowl. The local wildlife. Deer, because of the wetland sources and moist soil during the summer. It creates great browse during what might be a over dry year. You get a tremendous use of deer, unfortunately, but the wild hogs also benefit from it. It's just tied to the raccoons. You'll see every kind of wildlife that you can imagine out there. The program, in my opinion, has been a tremendous savior to the waterfowl in our area. As everyone knows, the Gulf Coast of Texas is a noted wintering habitat. Has been that way forever, and over the past couple of decades, it's been in steady decline as far as habitat degrading. Mainly due to civilization and people finding other uses and sources for the land. And the Prairie Wetland Project has been able to give back a lot of that habitat. My ranch is like one of those yellow dots on that map that Taylor put up earlier. But if you look at that entire
Marion, you just hit the mute button.
Okay, I'm not sure where I cut out, but anyway, the Gulf Coast region is a very important region for wintering waterfowl habitat, which has been declining habitat for the last several decades, mainly because of man and its a pursuit of use of the land and other aspects. But the Prairie Wetland Project has restored a tremendous amount of that and mitigated a lot of that loss. That map that Taylor showed earlier, I am one of those yellow dots on the map, and one yellow dot will not make that big a difference in the central flyway migration. But when you look at that whole conglomerate of all those yellow dots and all that yellow acreage, it's doing a tremendous amount of benefit for restoring the whole Gulf Coast region. Most all of my neighbors have at least one of these projects on their land. I happen to have several because I have been able to see the benefit of, excuse me, the benefit of what the program has to offer. And it's just been a wonderful win-win for conservation and for the landowner. And it probably would not be able to, to most people undertake it without the financial support of the organization, and the technical support of the organization has been extremely beneficial. And I'm willing to answer any questions that anyone has on the particular project or programs. The video he's talking about, I do highly recommend you watch it. It gives a much better overview of what goes on out there than probably I have been able to present today.
Thank you, Mr. Woolley. Steve, do you want me to just jump into the couple of questions or?
Yeah, go ahead, Taylor. You got it.
Okay. So it looks like the first question is, what would you say has been the most successful strategy to get folks interested in wetland conservation? That's a great question. And so I would say the way that we've historically done it through this program has been word of mouth, just having landowners like Mr. Woolley and other landowners in this geography almost brag about the work that they've done and the enhancements that they've had on the property. Because like Mr. Woolley said, these wetland projects expand a lot further than just wintering waterfowl. You see these benefits to shorebirds, to your deer population, you name it, and you're going to have various species that are going to be using these sites. And so it fits really good with many landowners, but then the other side of it is rice production, and that agricultural landscape really fits well for developing wetland habitat. And so rice is a flooded crop, and that also replicates into these wetland projects. And so we can fit many of these strategies or deliveries into current land uses to where we're not taking away or impacting what the landowners are currently using their property for. It's almost as an additional tool for how they can manage that property into the future.
Yeah, let me add something on that. That's a great point, Taylor. I rice farm on my land, and the Prairie Wetland project does not interfere with rice farming. It enhances it. And there's been other programs that DU does offer that actually do specific target rice enhancement. But as a prime example right now, we're in the process of second cropping one field of about 180 acres that is just above one of my DU projects. And we will probably within the next 2 weeks be draining the water off of that rice field so we can dry it out to reharvest. Normal practice, that water goes down the canal in the ditch and it's gone. With this project, we will pull the boards on that, and that water will all drain into my existing Prairie Wetlands DU project, and that water will be stored all winter for waterfowl habitat. That's the win-win I'm talking about. I paid for the water to flood my crop, and hopefully I get a return on that. But because of that project and the strategic placement of that project, I'm able to store it and share it with all the waterfowl and conservation enhancements.
Sure. Looks like there's maybe one or two more. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, you got a couple more minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. And so one of these questions says, do you see these projects requiring continued enhancement / incentive payments, giving management expenses and land use change pressures, or is this a self-funding strategy which with these projects? The presentation alluded to continued loss of rice acres. Yeah, so recently, so I've been with DU for about 5.5 years, and we started a habitat management program which is outside of this Texas Prairie Wetlands project to assist late successional wetland management across the Texas Gulf Coast. So we're building and constructing new wetland projects with private landowners, but we're also now working with various other private landowners to enhance this late successional habitat that may not be providing suitable habitat for waterfowl, and basically taking its baseline from 0 waterfowl benefits to 50 or 100. And so we do have that program, and it does have a small cost share, but through the Texas Prairie Wetlands project, we'll provide the technical assistance and the management advice. But after the project is complete, the landowner is going to be responsible for those enhanced management practices that they continue on the landscape for the years of that agreement. And so I guess the second part of that question is about the loss of rice acres across the Texas Gulf Coast. And DU's working in different facets of working with rice producers, one through the Texas Prairie Wetlands project, but we also have a rice stewardship program where we're working with these rice landowners to deliver some equip practices through NRCS, through RCPP program. And so we're working to keep this rice acres on the landscape, but also help build additional rice acres and build that landscape back up. So it's definitely progressing in the right direction, but we do what we can to help the landowners in our geography. And again, the partnership with Parks and Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife, NRCS, the Gulf Coast Joint Venture is key to our delivery and success of this program, and ensuring that we have funding to continue to deliver this habitat on the landscape. So I think with that, we're pretty close to out of time.
Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Mr. Woolley. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come and share your story. A lot of great comments in the chat. Thanking you as well. Much appreciated. Our final panel of the day and of the event, we're going to go all the way to the east side of the country after starting out on the west side today, and hear from the Otter Creek Watershed in Vermont. And I'm gonna kick it over to Ryan with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get that talk going. Ryan, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Steve. I'm actually going to kick it over to my boss, Chris Smith, to start us off.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I'm Chris Smith. I'm the Partners Program Coordinator for Vermont. Really want to say thanks to Partnerscapes and Steve and Jim for putting this on. This is a great way for us to connect all around the country on private lands projects. We're very honored up here in Vermont to be presenting with these same all these great partnerships that we're hearing about around the country. We're going to talk a little bit about the partnership we have in Otter Creek, and we just heard about those Gulf Coast, South Texas wetlands. We're going to talk about some of the Northeast floodplain wetlands that we work on here. And very similar to what we heard from Mr. Woolley, with rice farming, the dairy industry in Vermont has seen its share of hurdles and stressors over the years, and it's provided an opportunity to work with those landowners on wetland restoration and wetland conservation. Today, Ryan's the Partners for Fish and Wildlife biologist who's working on this project. We're also going to hear from Jim Eikenberry, who's the NRCS wetland specialist that works on this project. We're going to get to talk with Nan Jenks J, who's a landowner that's done some wetland conservation on their property, and then Mark Labar with Audubon Vermont, who's a real critical partner in this project as well. So I'm going to, with that, send it over to Ryan.
All right, thanks, Chris. So just to get folks oriented, I just want to give a little more background on where we're working and why we're working there. So we're gonna, as Steve mentioned, we'll head to the northeastern United States here. And so just to orient you, this is Vermont, dominated by the Green Mountains. And then New York's Adirondack Mountains are to our west. And within that is Lake Champlain, about 120-mile long natural lake that drains to the north into the St. Lawrence River. And you can kind of see, just to give us some context, to the south of us is the Hudson River. So you kind of have this nice flyway connection from the coast, kind of a shortcut up to breeding ground in Canada. So the Lake Champlain basin is kind of where most of the agriculture in Vermont is. Dairy farming is the dominant form of agriculture here. And in this photograph, we have Vermont in the foreground, dairy farms, as you can see, Lake Champlain in the middle, and then those mountains of the Adirondack Mountains in the background. So if we zoom in within that kind of broad valley of our state, we kind of zoom in on Otter Creek itself, which is a major tributary of Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain up in that northwest corner of the state, Otter Creek flowing to the north. It's Vermont's longest river. It's also home to the New England's largest and most diverse wetland complex. And that name Otter Creek showed up on maps from the explorer Samuel de Champlain as the river with otters, but the name goes way back before that to the Abenaki name for Little River of Otters, and the Mohawks called it the abode of the otters. So this area has a rich archaeological history too. And it was known as the Indian Road by early settlers who were traveling basically from southern New England and then using Otter Creek to get up to Lake Champlain and beyond. So the creek itself is not very large, but what makes it unique is that it flows through, much of it is through that larger Champlain Valley, which was at one time like a sea. And so we have a lot of really good soils there. We also have a lot of kind of poorly drained soils. So you've got the Green Mountains in the background there. We have a lot of rainfall in our region and a fair amount of snowfall. And from that snow melt, we get a lot of water moving through this landscape. And so what that happens down in the valley is we get a lot of flooding, particularly in the spring, that snow melt, which is hugely important for those migrating waterfowl, as well as many other wildlife species. If we kind of zoom in a little closer on that landscape, as I mentioned, dairy farming is that dominant land use within the valley floor. And coupled with that are a series of kind of small cities and towns that have sprung up along Otter Creek at those fall lines, where you actually have a little bit of water power for during early settlement. So that picture on the right is town of Middlebury. And then in the center of the photo, if we get that aerial view of the floodplain, you've got Otter Creek running through the middle of the slide. And then on either side, you have that active floodplain of Otter Creek. And what you see on the landscape is once you get into that floodplain, you get into those poorly drained soils. So kind of since after World War II, there was a big increase in to try to drain those. So you can kind of see all those angular ditches out there. These sites are all going to flood, but trying to get that water off quicker. The result is that you have a lot of drained wetlands within Otter Creek drainage, and they have kind of reduced functions and values. They've also, a lot of those have been found to be fairly marginal from an agricultural perspective, because they still couldn't get them to really drain out. And kind of interesting in our region, unlike a lot of regions, during the last 30 years, rainfall has actually been increasing. So some of these sites are getting wetter, becoming more marginal, And so a lot of the landowners, whether they're large dairy farms or smaller operations or other landowners, are kind of looking for other uses for those sites. So the really neat thing about Otter Creek is you have a whole complex of wetlands. You have the forested wetlands, these scrub shrub wetlands. You have large forest blocks in the upland. And so you're able to support a great variety of wildlife. So as the Fish and Wildlife Service, we still have that duck in the center of our slide there with the hooded merganser that are going to be breeding in these habitats. But then we also are thinking about birds like that common yellowthroat in the upper left corner that's going to be using those scrub shrub wetlands, as well as some of our raptors like osprey, which are nesting in these sites as well. And then I think it's also important with Otter Creek, what makes it different with that accessible floodplain, those large wetlands, you get a lot of species that can move from those upland habitats that are intact down into the wetlands, like that blue spotted salamander that's going to be breeding in those wetlands. And then we also have a quite a bit of working landscape that kind of supports some of our more rare species, such as like the golden wing warbler, which is a species in decline. That's one of our at-risk species that we're looking out for. So to have all those kind of habitats in close proximity helps us to support a lot of wildlife. And of course, Otter Creek they were all right. There are otters in Otter Creek, but probably even more of a factor in kind of the functioning of these places is the beaver, which I think people see all across the country with their work as far as changing water levels and changing habitats and creating a real mosaic. So all the work that I might put on the ground typically gets altered by the beavers to some degree, which is usually much better in the end than what we started with. Other species that particularly these large forested wetlands support black bear, bobcat, and moose that are going to be more wide ranging. So the other thing that kind of makes Otter Creek unique in our region, in that it sits at a place, kind of one of those few connections between that large forest block of the Adirondack Mountains in New York and the Green Mountains in Vermont. And so some of those more wide-ranging species, they have a lot of barriers between further south, there's more development. Further north, you obviously have this very long lake as a barrier. So Otter Creek represents one of those few areas where you have kind of that lowland connection to get from those larger forest blocks. So, and as I mentioned, the wetlands that are there, that are intact, they have some really tremendous functions and values. And just a few of them here. We do have kind of a lot of plants that we find there that we don't find elsewhere in the state. Also from a water quality standpoint, Lake Champlain and Otter Creek itself, kind of looking at water quality in those water bodies, sediment and nutrient removal is a huge importance and a focus for the state. And then the flood flow attenuation, these accessible floodplains have been hugely important in limiting impacts of flooding. You know, back in just 10 years ago, we had our largest flood on record in Vermont, and those records go back pretty far. And so it was found that these wetlands were hugely important in reducing those peak flows, protecting those downstream towns. And then finally, the carbon sequestration particularly through those soils in these, when you get into these real peat and muck soils, tremendous amount of carbon stored there. So the work we've been doing in collaboration with a whole lot of landowners coming in all sorts of stripes and different backgrounds and different goals and objectives. As you can see, what starts out with pretty small parcels, what we're trying to do, as shown on this map, is the red are the projects that NRCS and Fish and Wildlife Service have been partnering on with private landowners to try to find those marginal farmland and retire those into wetland habitat. And we do that by general earthwork as shown in this picture, whether that's plugging ditches, removing berms, excavating depressional wetlands, trying to restore that the vegetation through planting and invasive control, as well as the earthwork to restore that hydrology and the topography. So coupled with that effort on Otter Creek, because of its biological significance and essentially the amount of drained wetlands along it, we're also trying to partner with our state and nonprofit partners. As you can see on this map, the purple is Vermont Fish and Wildlife Management Areas, and the yellow is Nature Conservancy property. So those are largely intact wetlands. And so what starts out as a pretty small kind of postage stamp is the goal is to try to link up to really get some real landscape scale projects here by working with a whole lot of different landowners. So just to give a sense of what some of these sites look like, a site that was bermed, often the sites they've grown wet over the years, so that kind of corn ground keeps getting narrower and narrower. And so after 10 years, what we're getting is that floodplain forest back, which was kind of the goal for this area to reestablish that. In this spot, you've got a wet hayfield that has a ditch kind of running through the center of your screen there. Able to hay it in dry years, not always. And then following kind of extensive earthwork, placement of woody debris, removal of berms, and reconnecting that to the floodplain, we're now getting that tremendous wildlife habitat back. Hugely important for waterfowl, as well as kind of creates a nursery for our Otter Creek fishery, particularly like northern pike are using these as well as just a whole host of other wildlife that's going to be moving between these different habitats that are close together. So for today, we're gonna spend some time talking with one of our favorite landowners, who's one of the owners of the Miller Hill Farm, which is perched just above that floodplain of Otter Creek that you can kind of see in the background. And with that, I just want to thank to all our private landowners. Obviously, we're hugely dependent on them for this work and have a lot of fun doing it. And with that, I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Jim Eikenberry with NRCS.
Right, thanks, Ryan, and hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us today. I'm going to just talk real briefly before handing things over to Nan Jenks J, who's one of the landowners, as Ryan mentioned in our program. So again, I'm Jim Eikenberry with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm our wetland specialist here in Vermont. For this part of my job, I manage our agricultural conservation easement program, Wetland Reserve Easements, which for those of you that have been around a little while, remember it as the old Wetland Reserve Program. In Vermont, we're primarily focused on permanent conservation easements on land with agriculturally altered wetlands. You'll find nationwide there is some variability based on state law and also tribal participation. So some sites might be able to do 30-year easements, but for us we're focused on in perpetuity easements, where NRCS is acquiring agricultural development rights, agricultural use rights, development rights, land management rights, and the private landowners that we work with are voluntarily agreeing to put that land really back into restored wetlands and wildlife habitat to meet their objectives. Here in Vermont, more than 80% of our land is privately owned, and that conservation work is really happening on private lands with NRCS as our main focus. And we wouldn't have an easement program without private landowners. And one of the things that's excited us, as Ryan mentioned, is that you just don't have one huge landowner with 30,000 acres all along the creek here in Vermont. Somebody might have 40 acres, somebody might have 400 acres, but it really takes working, with lots and lots of landowners to, over time, stitch together a really functioning and connected, restored wetland landscape. And it's been really exciting to work with a lot of private landowners over the years who have these goals of improving wildlife habitat and wanting to sequester carbon on their property as they think about climate change and wanting to attenuate sediment and other nutrients to improve water quality, because we have major water quality concerns, especially in the Lake Champlain Basin. And so all those goals really come together, and our conservation easement program with NRCS really sets the stage and creates a space where what if it was just NRCS and the private landowner would be really good conservation. But as we bring in other partners like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program and Audubon Vermont and at other sites Ducks Unlimited, and everybody really gets together and there's a lot of synergy, we take what is a good project and it becomes a really great project. And instead of being an isolated project, it can really spread because other landowners see what's going on, they get excited about it, and they also want to do that on their property. So again, really grateful for this partnership. And I want to hand things over to Nan so she can share with us her experience, and take it away, Nan.
Hey, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Chris, Brian, and Jim. So indeed, that last photo that was shown of our farm is Miller Hill Farm Nursery and Gardens. This property is 200 years old, and we purchased it 25 years ago and have been operating it ever since. And let me describe it today. In the fall of New England, the red maples are deep crimson color and various shades of gold and yellow from the poplars and willows and the silver maple trees. The waterfall have been arriving for the last 2 weeks as a staging area. And this includes the skeins of Canada geese that drop in at night and then talk to each other all night long. It's quite an amazing site. And what isn't spectacular about this expansive wetland complex, where it provides all of the flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, wildfowl and amphibian attributes, in addition to, as was noted, the water quality for Lake Champlain, which has been really important. Over 30 rare and endangered and uncommon species have been documented in the swamp. And again, that was mentioned that it's this incredible corridor of movement, both east and west and north and south, and also elevation wise. So from the swamp up to the highlands for species like bobcat or salamanders, which actually go back down, and things that use the different parts of this larger ecosystem for breeding and hunting. So one other additional aspect of the swamp's attributes is unique and multiple recreational values. So we've seen, in addition to the hunting and fishing, traditionally real uptick in birding and photography in the last year, particularly with COVID. The ornithological lab and the Cornell has seen a surge of birding, and we offer bird walks here as an educational program. We generally offer one, and there was so much interest, we needed to offer 3. And what we saw was a generational change. So young people with apps were coming, in addition to the people who had kind of grown up birding with their bird guides. So it's really exciting to see that shift of interest in nature and then the out of doors. This is something that is also restorative for humans in the last year. So in partnership with the partners, with Ryan, we installed an osprey pole, and that was with a local power company, Green Mountain Power, and also with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And that osprey has been a big star this year. People keep coming back to see how it's doing and to watch its progress, because you can look down at the pole without having any intrusion on the site. And then we would post things on our Facebook page to keep people updated. So they were excited to know the changes that were taking place. And recently that fledgling has left for its first migration. None of that would have been possible without the partnership. So when we came here, we immediately took the floodplain fields out of corn. They were marginal. They were heavily chemically induced and sprayed with manure. But removing those fields from corn wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough because those fields wanted to be floodplains again. So this wonderful, incredible thing happened one day, which was that Jim contacted us with the NRCS about permanently protecting this land with conservation easement, which was a dream of ours all along. And so Jim's great strength is being able to work with property owners that are interested in this program and having them understand the ins and outs of the project and how it will affect them over time. And you can see he's had great success with 50 different landowners on 3,000 acres. So it was great to have this land protected, but then it still wasn't good enough. And then we were introduced to Ryan, and Ryan's deep knowledge of the hydrology and his unbelievable skill in developing relationships with property owners and building trust took this project to another level. So that's when the area, the ditches got plugged. And let me say that canoeing from our property north up here, one can count 92 ditches in the agricultural fields. So changing that hydrology made a big difference. And he also helped install these depression areas and pools that this summer he was able to observe a hooded merganser with 11 ducklings following behind it, where last year there was just dust and remnants of an old field. And so with this assistance, the wetland reverts back to what it is meant to be, what it is intended to be. Over time, almost 50% of Vermont's wetland has been either lost or seriously altered. So today, when my husband and I, Carl, go kayaking in the spring, we slide quietly right by a very secretive wetland bird, a sora, which is in the rail family, walking on a vegetative mat as if we are not even there, or under a willow tree that is the first to bloom, and it's humming with bees gathering pollen because nothing else is in bloom yet. And in the winter, we can snowshoe or ski into the swamp and see tracks of things that we would never notice close up or in person. So the 10 and 20 foot otter slides, and it's thought that the slides are part of otter's mode of transportation. But when you watch the tracks, which is three big bounds, 1, 2, 3, and then belly slide for 20 feet, and then pop back down into the water, you can't help but think there's not a little fun going on in there. So this beleaguered landscape that wanted to become a swamp again has, through this assistance, been restored. And we're deeply, deeply grateful for that. In the spring, in the vernal pools, the cacophony of frogs and toads is almost deafening, but it's a harbinger of spring and the most beautiful things to come. So we look out over this and we have deep satisfaction in that this work so matches our own values and love of nature. And because we've been educators our entire life, pardon me, we continue to share this land and these stories with others, which we think is increasingly important. But the work's not done. There's more to do. We need to remove invasive species, plant native trees and shrubs, and we particularly need to protect and restore some of the upland areas along the side of the wetland to expand this really important ecosystem. And that work, I think, is our next charge. And I'm going to pass this mic over to Mark, who's been really working hard with us on upland species and the areas that are critical connectors to the swamp. So Mark, if you would take it from there, thank you.
Great, Nan. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sitting here at my house and I'm looking at all the colors that are popping here in Vermont right now. And it really is great to see the synergy that's come together between all of the partners, yourself, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NRCS. And Audubon Vermont is fortunate to be in that mix. We've worked with all of these partners, landowners. Sometimes landowners connect to us and we connect them to NRCS and the Partners Program, providing them with technical assistance. Sometimes it's the other ways around. And that was the case here at Nan's property, where Ryan reached out to me to come down and take a look at this site. And, Nan mentioned those uplands. Vermont isn't flat. So as the Otter Creek moseys down through the valleys, things quickly rise on either side. And as Ryan mentioned, changes in the dairy industry has left a lot of the back 40, some of these hillside pastures and old farm fields, allowed them to grow up into ideal young forest and shrubland habitat. And that's where we find birds like golden-winged warblers, which is one of our priority species, and a species that we've been working both with NRCS and the Partners Program to protect and enhance habitat on a number of different projects throughout the Champlain Valley. And it was great to wander out onto Nan's property in the early spring and not only hear a golden wing singing, but a blue wing. We had some towhees there, I believe. And so adjacent to this vast wetland complex, which is just down below, is an old pasture that is currently supporting these species. Now, many of the things that we do and Partners Program does and NRCS does is to enhance these habitats. One of our best management practice is invasive species removal. So primarily honeysuckle and buckthorn and sometimes multiflora rose. And that removal and then keeping the native shrubs in place, our dogwoods, our nannyberries, allows the habitat to be adequate for our winged warblers, our golden-winged warblers. The Champlain Valley is currently pretty much the easternmost population, one of the large populations of golden wings across their range. The golden-winged warbler conservation plan has identified the southern Champlain Valley as one of their focus areas, and the Miller Hill Farm lies within that. So I'm fortunate to be able to work cooperatively through some funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to provide technical assistance to Ryan and to the folks on the NRCS staff as to how we might move forward in maintaining that upland habitat so it functions in a way that supports the wetland habitat along the Otter Creek. And this is just a great combination of multiple partners coming together to make this project happen over time. And as Nan mentioned, another big thing, just the fact that some of these birds really bring out Vermont's birders. And it was great when I spoke to Nan and everybody earlier this week and heard that many of those birders were young people that were coming out and were attracted to golden-winged warblers. They're a draw. And for Nan to be able to, and her husband, to open up that property for that recreational purpose, and at the same time highlight the work that's being done, whether it's being the hydrological stuff or the Osprey platform, or just to stand up on that hillside, hearing golden wings warblers singing and look down into the Otter Creek Valley. It's just a great opportunity all around to highlight the partnership and the individual programs and the effort that has gone on their property now for a number of years. So this will hopefully continue. This is just one property. As Ryan mentioned, there's lots of small properties and private landowners and public landowners. So with the connections with the Partners Program and NRCS, Audubon Vermont is able to expand and work again with properties that they've identified as key. we can provide technical assistance there. And many of our outreach efforts, when we're working with private landowners that need to make the connections for incentive programs to support some of the conservation work, we're able to turn around and reach out to Ryan and Jim and others to pull those pieces together to make a project like this work multiple times over the landscape. So it's been really fun. Vermont's a small state. You run into the same people all the time. And this is just a great example of all those pieces coming together on many different levels. I think that should leave us with about 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions, I think that was my task.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Great job. I think there was a question that Chris was potentially going to respond to, if he's willing and able.
Yeah, I can respond. There was a question about timber harvest in the floodplain wetlands. And I did write back to the question, and there's not much timber harvest. There's some harvest of trees for firewood in the floodplain wetlands. And then these are relatively young forests, 100 years old. So there is some limited harvest, and mostly around firewood.
Chris, that's an interesting question, because if you look historically at the way these little villages are divided, people had their farmland lot upland, and the reason these swamp lots are so small is that they were firewood lots. They were wood lots historically, and most of that timber has been removed. But that's why there are these very peculiar shaped and inaccessible lots where people's firewood lots over time.
But, there is, proper and appropriate harvesting, forest harvesting for the timber industry is present on the landscape in Vermont. A lot of Vermont's lands are even age stands sometimes that lack the diversity that they need. So there is opportunity not only in the upland to work on some of those early cereal stages, like an old field that's coming back into shrubs, but to work to manage for that forest that has that diverse structure for bird species. And NRCS has a number of programs that support that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your talk and your time with us. We had a lot of positive feedback in the chat. I wish we had a soundtrack for applause, but we'll think about that to do this.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you guys so much for the time and for sharing it with us.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks to all the panels today. And I'm gonna, and yesterday as well, I'm gonna kick it over to Chairman Jim Stone to let him introduce our closing speaker. Jim.
Thanks, Steve. And again, thanks to 2 days of just wonderful, as we say out here, neighboring up. Oh, if that isn't the mother of all neighboring up stories the last 2 days, that's wonderful. So thank you all for taking the time. I know it takes a lot of your time to put those together on a Zoom platform, but I'm glad we all had a chance to do that. And I am absolutely honored to welcome in Martha. We, Partnerscape started back in 2006, and we're still blessed with so many great partners, and both public and private. But it really was the sort of the foundation that got us started was the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we had to get signed off with the Secretary of Interior for a grant, and that just started the whole waterfall of partnerscapes. And so we have very fond relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we rank the Partners Program as one of the finest private lands programs in the country, and some of the greatest people. And we're lucky that We work across the aisle with Department of Ag, with NRCS. So, you know, we've just all melded this together, and it's such a great story. It's such an inspiration to where we're going in this country for food and fiber. All of you've heard it this week. We just got to continue this, tell the story. And I can't welcome a better person than Martha Williams, who has been a dear friend in Montana and done a ton of work here, and now gets to sit as a principal deputy in DC, which is a little bit of heartbreak for us in Montana, but really puts her in a special place to do great things for not only partnerscapes, but for all of us that are in the private lands and public land management. So with that, Martha, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're in meetings constantly, so this is such an honor to have you close out, I think, what was just a stellar couple days of great stories. So welcome, and very nice to see you this morning.
Thank you, Jim. And I think we all know, if you know Jim well at all, he's pretty good at telling tall tales. So take whatever he just said about me with a grain of salt, right, Jim?
No, it's all good.
So thank you for having me here today. It really is a privilege, and I'm only sad to swoop in at the end and not have had the chance to sit in and listen to you and learn from you throughout the last 2 days. But I have no doubt that you covered a lot of amazing ground, and really look forward to what comes out of this meeting. So just an honor to help close out the Private Lands Partners Day this year. And on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the entire conservation community, I want to start by expressing our deep gratitude to the private landowners here today. And can I say that again? I really want to emphasize that deep appreciation and gratitude for each of you here today. Thank you for your dedication and support of land stewardship across the nation. You put so much into your land and into place and into community, and it just couldn't be more critical. I also want to thank Steve Jester, and the board of directors and everyone else who has made this event possible. I know it takes a lot to pull something like this together, and everyone's hard work shows. And I would add, thank you for the flexibility to hold this year's event virtually. We've all really had to adapt how we pull meetings together and how we get our inside work done together. So as a little bit of background, I feel like I'm essentially a farm girl. I actually was at my parents' farm this weekend, helping them. They're in their late 80s, and they run the farm where I grew up north of Baltimore, and was helping them actually with some of the hard stuff that comes with running a farm, and dealing with a heifer that had pneumonia, actually, and that was the end of her, and I was happy to be there to be able to help them. So I'm saying that because I learned about conservation by watching it, by throwing hay bales, and I think by saying that I date myself, don't I? Not that many people use hay bales anymore, but I learned about conservation in talking about it at the kitchen table, talking about it at the dinner table, and seeing how important it was to our family firsthand. It also taught me early on, and boy, I feel like I've learned this in spades throughout my career, that conservation, and then specifically wildlife conservation, is a shared responsibility. I don't think any of us anymore think that any of us could do it alone, that this is something that we all share, and with that privilege comes a shared responsibility as well. And I appreciate that more and more in my career, and hence why I so appreciate each of you on this call today. And it's also one of the reasons why I am really excited to be working for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And the heartbreak of leaving Montana and coming to DC is mine as well. Although I have to say DC gets a worse rap than it deserves, and that it's a pretty vibrant place where people are here because they care and want to make a difference. And it's also nice for me to help my parents on the weekends when I have weekends off. So the Fish and Wildlife Service, I think about this every single morning that I come into work. Our mission is to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, and plants and their habitats for the continuing benefit of the American people. And I remind myself of that every morning because it starts with to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance. And it's for the benefit, the continuing benefit for all Americans. So I just think that's like, how cool is that, that we start off with working with others, and that it then explicitly recognizes the critical role that partnerships play in wildlife conservation. And conservation partnerships represented at this year's Private Land Partners Day are a testament to the importance of working together. I love that expression, neighboring up, because I think that's what it's all about, Jim. And I've always been a true believer in Jim's words, and I think they matter. So these types of neighboring up projects underscore also, I think, that the quality and the durability of public-private conservation partnerships, that the good work or the strong work that gets done, and I'm not saying it's always easy, it's more durable when we work hard together because we've developed it together. I'm starting to think about, it's not just collaboration and it's not just coordination. I think we're learning we also have to build together. So it's not just everyone doing their separate thing and then coordinating it. It's that we're learning to build it together. That's what makes it so durable in the long run, and that it helps communities as well. So the strong working relationships that you have built have allowed all of us to adapt and persevere and make progress in land stewardship across the country. So as an example, the Fish and Wildlife Services Partners Program, Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, with your help, we've all been able to restore and enhance, just through that program alone, 250,000 acres and 240 streams and shorelines. So that's an accomplishment that's only able to happen through that, those true partnerships where we're building those projects together. So thank you for that. And today, many of our federal conservation programs focus on preserving public lands, and rightfully so. But that's a drop in the bucket when you consider that approximately 2/3 of all land in the US are privately owned. So simply put, we can't and don't want to succeed in conserving America's native fish and wildlife resources, or in expanding opportunities for all Americans to enjoy them, unless we successfully engage in collaboratively work with private landowners. And we can't ask private landowners like you to bear the burden of caring for that wildlife alone. We at the service know we've got to provide tools, technical advice, and incentives to make a place for these resources. So collaborative partnerships, relationships, and other partnerships exemplify the way that conservation work should happen in our country. So think about tackling complex wildlife conservation and land management challenges and achieving the goals identified in this administration's conservation agenda and the America the Beautiful agenda. America the Beautiful initiative requires that collaboration, and I would add requires building together. Do we have any complex? Let me ask that. Do we have any complex wildlife or conservation challenges? I think so. I think most of the wildlife issues we all tackle together are complex, and they take a long time, and they can be cyclical, as I think we've just seen with wolves, where we think we've got a handle on it, and then it picks up again, and they're constant. There's no switch that goes on and off, but it's this continuing cycle of working together. So I really believe then that ranchers, farmers, producers, and others who live on the land are true conservationists and understand the place and the context in which we deliver conservation, that you carry forward these generations of knowledge and dedication and experience in conservation outcomes and in managing the habitat where you live and work. And I think it's just part of your DNA, and for us to really pay attention to that. And so in that respect, I am proud of the Fish and Wildlife Service in having a long history of working with private landowners and on working lands through our voluntary programs. And it's important that we continue in that tradition, that we continue to invest in our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program and in our candidate conservation agreements to support conservation on private lands. And I can think of so many examples of where you really can see the result of that work. But that doesn't mean we won't also always look for new ways to invest in local, voluntary, and collaborative conservation efforts, that we use the tools that we have, but perhaps there are more, and for us to be open to that. So as we look at the America the Beautiful, this really exciting call to action, I think the crux of it is that we focus on these locally led and voluntary efforts, that each of us on this call and that have been involved in your last 2 days of meetings, I think we've all learned that. We've learned sometimes the hard way, sometimes the best way, by rolling up our sleeves and working together, that that's this nubbin of success, where we realize locally led and voluntary efforts really do make a difference. So that will guide much of our work at the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so I thought it would be helpful to say a few words about the America the Beautiful initiative and how it relates to the Fish and Wildlife Service's land stewardship. We see it, I see it, as a call to action to conserve and restore America's lands and waters for the benefit of all of America. That's not something new. I think we've had much of a focus on that. What is new about it is an administration explicitly recognizing the value of this, that I feel like there's an alignment by many in saying, yes, we really care about this. And we also, as part of that initiative, recognize the role of private landowners, recognize private land ownership and what that means, and that locally led and voluntary efforts are really critical. Another key piece, and I don't need to preach this to you, is we recognize that one size doesn't fit all, that place varies and there are different needs in different places across the country so that we will necessarily adapt our framework based on the place, based on the climate and nature and habitat and community and context. I don't know if you can see this big whiteboard behind me. I've been using that to really get to strategic thinking. And it starts with Jim Stone. It starts with context and place. And I want that always to ground our work, to start with that context and place. And that includes how we implement the America the Beautiful initiative. So it's all about working with communities to identify and build together conservation programs that will work in that place, in that community, and for the Fish and Wildlife Service to invest in those efforts and help stitch them together in a way that knits together the efforts for that place, or for a corridor. What does it mean to connect these efforts in a way that delivers the most for wildlife conservation, for water, for our lands? So this is a moment where I'm asking for your engagement. I know that Partnerscapes, we have these wonderful regular meetings that we all fight at the Fish and Wildlife Service. We all fight over who gets to go to them. And I think we are always asking ourselves, how can we each help each other? How can we build this together as we move forward? And so we've heard loud and clearly that these locally led, voluntary, ground up, place-based efforts are where I think we can make the most lasting difference and helping communities as well. And we're here for I'm interested in the long term and not the short term gains. So we heard about the wanting to know we're focused on conservation, not just preservation. Heard that loudly and clearly and understand that. And I think we heard a lot. I hope those of you who have had a chance to read the America the Initiative report, it's a really good read. And I hope you will see that many of the comments your groups posited are reflected in that report and that we heard them. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the conversation whatsoever, that the conversation must continue, and we will be listening all along and adapting to your needs to be able to get a lot of really good work done in the near future, but in the long term. So what better way to celebrate that than with a Private Lands Partners Day? I understand that is this true, Jim? This is so cool that the Private Lands Partner Day began a decade ago after the Blackfoot Challenge in Montana was recognized by Harvard by an Innovations in Government Award. Like I think that we all know what can we replicate? What can we learn from that and amplify it? And so thank you for inviting me, because I'm just here to amplify really your work, and look forward to lots of good discussions, and most importantly, lots of good work to come. Thank you, Jim. Thank you all, everyone.
Thank you, Martha. Very, very inspirational, and what a way to close out a wonderful week. And for the health of the country, you might want to erase my name off that whiteboard. I'm not sure that's the best model up there on that board, but no, so well spoken, and we couldn't have closed out the day without you. And we are all very much inspired to continue and work locally and do that neighbor up. And we just want you to know, along with all our other partners, that we're tied to the wagon. Let's move forward and continue these conversations as long as we can. So thanks for taking that time. And Steve, I'll turn it back to you for any kind of closing deals we got to do, or we'll close this out.